So we're going to ease into this practice. So the first drill is going to be by yourself in your journal. We're just going to generate some questions, all right? So here's the scenario I'm going to give you. And you're just going to write questions that you might ask. Now, here's one of the problems I've learned. Sometimes we try to connect personally and want to know what our students are doing, but we ask questions that are ineffective in actually getting the information, right? And you run into this with your children. I do too. But if I ask my kids, how was your day at school? They're going to say, fine. That's what they're going to say. And even if I go, well, no, what did you learn? They're going to be like, right? So you can't ask, if you want to know how their day went at school, you cannot ask, how did your day go at school? That's not going to work. But that's the question we want to ask, and so that's what we ask. So the goal today is, I'm going to give you a scenario. You cannot ask the thing you actually want to know. You've got to be creative and ask questions that are more specific and more motivating for them to answer. So here's your scenario number one. And again, this one is just a brainstorm with yourself. So we're going to use cross country. It's cross country season, and you know that one of your students is on the team because it's come up, or you Facebook, social media stalked them or whatever, but you know they're on the cross country team and they had a major meet, okay? So what questions could you ask to find out how cross country is going without asking, how's cross country going? Okay, I'm going to give you 90 seconds. Ready to go. More seconds. Try to think of all the creative ways, things you could ask. All right, Evelyn, will you come over here and be with Jonathan? And we'll have Miles and Julie and Missy and Melinda. And just share your questions and kind of feed off each other for a second. See if maybe you come up with even better questions as you kind of share.
All right. So my question would be, what was your time compared to your personal record?
That's what I said.
That's because I have a study
And So, how's cross country going is the question we can ask. So, where was your cross country race yesterday? Because they'll have like an Allerton or around like the woods or different places. How many schools were there? Was it what was your time? Is that a good time? Like, I haven't ran in a long time. Is that a good time? What's your best time ever then? And so, with that, you can look at what's your best time ever.
Right.
It's a good time.
Well, another one that I would ask is, where did your team place in the event? Because usually the teams have a score, and then they have other teams, depending on who finishes first and what their times are, depends on where their team actually scores.
So
across that. Right. So if you have, let's say your team has a person who is the fastest, but everybody else is really slow, well, your team doesn't score as well because you only have one person who did.
All right. Let's debrief for a second. I've been eavesdropping. I've been Facebook stalking all of you. I thought you did a pretty good job, right? Were there some questions that you're like, oh, that's actually a really good way to ask that? Any surprising questions you didn't think of that your partner thought of one? Or were you all kind of on the same page?
Good. Fine.
Evelyn was more about the experience, like during the race. I was more like facts regarding the race.
Right, you're more analytical. You wanted to know PR, where, who's the fastest on your team, something like that. Well, what do you mean the experience of the race? What were some of the questions?
Like where my son ran cross country, it was always in a country setting. So he'd come home and go, man,
2 people lost their shoe, we had to jump over a mud puddle.
So what's a question you could ask to get them to tell stories like that?
How did I put it?
What kind of course did you?
Yeah, that was it.
That's true, but that's a little more analytical.
Yeah.
Remember, we're trying to get down to a personal level.
So mine was I noticed you guys ran in Middleburg yesterday, and that's where I'm from anyway. So was the course really muddy this time?
Yeah.
Anybody lose a shoe?
So you know some details, right?
So
now those are both yes or no questions, though. Right.
Who lost their shoe?
Did anything funny happen yesterday?
Yeah. Did anybody get hurt?
Did anybody have an unfortunate series of events?
Yeah, I noticed that a girl was being carried across the finish line, or I read it in the paper or something.
Yeah. I like that though. When you get to the personal, do any of you have you ever ran before? Do you know anything about running? Yeah. So some of you know through your kids, right? And so if you don't know the experience they're going through, well then get curious, right? Like, why do you run? That's a question I'd ask cross-country runners. Why do you even run? Running's the worst. Don't you think running's the worst? Why do you like it? Yeah. I would ask a question like this. Have you ever ran until you threw up? Boys love those kind of questions. Maybe not a girl, right? What? Have you ever gotten to that level? Yeah. Tell me about that. Or was this one a challenging course? What was hard about that, right? And this is my way, but I even would say things like, so I noticed that sometimes marathon runners, you're running for a long time. What do you go to the bathroom? Like, how does that even work, And kids might have funny stories about stuff like that, Anyway, but you get personal and you kind of ask some of those questions better than just, so how was cross country yesterday? Fine.
I was in a situation a week or so ago where I was talking with a group of people that I don't know that well. And I shared some story from my life, something. And one of the women that I was talking to looked at me and she said, "That is a great story."
Really?
It made me feel so good. And I thought, I'm totally going to use that. Like, seriously,
that is a great
I felt
story.
listened to,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I was so proud of myself for sharing it. You know what I mean? Like, it just made
It's
me
validation.
feel so good. And so I thought, I'm totally going to use those words.
Man, if you could get your kids to tell a funny story, and then you say something validating like, "That's a great story."
Yeah.
That's gold. This is happening, right? Everybody comes together, And you can, and that may be a time, you might think of a time when you did something, maybe not cross country, but you did something similarly. Although I could talk about a triathlon that I went on where I had to go to the bathroom really bad, and it's a long thing, and I was just praying. I was like, "Heavenly Father, I don't want to be one of those people that comes across the line and everybody's like, and I was praying, and all of a sudden this porta potty just came over the hill, and I was like, whatever. But that's funny, and the kids are like, "Oh, yeah," and now we're sharing stuff about, maybe it's TMI, but that's my way. Anyway, so, all right, you ready for number 2? So that was warm-up. That was you to get your minds kind of thinking along this line. Now you're going to work with your partner, but again, this is not a role play. This one's not. We'll do the third one on role play. So in this one, you're going to now just think on your feet. We're not writing it down, but you are just going to give each other suggested questions that you might have, all right? Let's say you've got a senior in your class that you don't have a terrible relationship with, but you don't have as close a relationship as you think you could. But what are some questions that you can ask to a senior that's senior specific? It's getting close to the end of the year, right? But you can't ask them like, a question that's going to get them a fine, yes, right? So just brainstorm with each other now on your feet. If you're going to be curious about what's going on with the senior, ready to go.
What are you doing for prom this year?
When's graduation?
Clocked out of school yet? I guess that is it.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Seniors, they just stop
Or what I
caring.
ask, are you going to graduate?
So how do you make that not a yes or no question?
That would be a yes or no question.
But still get to the heart of that.
Clocked out of school yet?
What's hard about being a senior in
And they're very different.
February?
One is.
Let's see here.
How long do you have left of school?
You're almost
He
there.
is, doesn't talk about
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. and-
What kind of things is the senior class doing this year to, are you having any school events?
Where are you planning to go to
What kind of
school?
school events are you,
Yeah.
is your school putting on, or is your senior class participating in, I guess? Field trips or something?
What kind of adventures are in store for you over the next
Yeah.
couple of months?
Family coming in town. You taking any loser classes?
Yeah, they're trying to.
I did.
Are you still doing?
Let's see here.
They've got to go.
I guess your one question is
I majored in home ec and just cooked all my senior year.
what colleges are you looking at, or what your, I guess that goes along with your future plans, right?
But I'll turn around, so.
Maybe ask them, how's your vision plan? What are your plans regarding that? Everything you want to get at the forefront.
Let me time you out for a second. And I'm liking the questions I hear, but I am hearing you run out of steam. You're like, oh, I don't know, this is a little hard. So maybe, I'm going to give you a minute. What's something that you can ask that would get them excited to answer?
What question are you trying to get in your brain into our brain?
What do you mean?
Do you have a question that you want us to have?
No,
Okay.
but this is always the goal. If the response you get from them is them just rattling off a couple of things, I don't know if that's what you want. What's something you can ask them, or how could you ask them in a way that would get them excited to share a story or to, right? That's what we're trying to go for. I don't really have one in my head. I'm just saying, I can tell by the tone of the questions we're asking that I'm kind of trying to, and the kid knows you're trying to, right? And everybody knows you're just trying to get them to say stuff, right? But can you ask them something that gets them excited? Brainstorm as a class, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yes.
What might they be excited to answer?
What are they doing after graduation?
Okay, so let's work on that then. So what's a way we can ask that would get them really excited? Because seniors are really excited to move on. They can't wait till they're gone. Some of them maybe are freaked out of their minds about what's going on, right? So what could we ask? How can we get them excited to answer the question, whether they're excited or scared?
Well, just don't let them off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can ask them a question, if they give you some lame answer, ask them another question on that. Like, keep them going to
Or call them on it. You're like, really?
Yeah.
You're a senior about to, the rest of your life's ahead of you, and that's the answer you're going to give me? Maybe. Go ahead. So give me an example of a question you could ask. That's
Well,
not. What are
it
you
comes
going
down
to
to do it like a yes or no question, but it's like, are you excited to move out? Are your parents excited for you to move out? Why are you
But
excited
how
to
do you
move out?
assume that they're moving out?
Well, you can ask them, are you moving out?
What are your plans? I know, like, what are your plans after graduation? And then wherever they go.
What are you the most excited
College,
about?
what colleges do you apply to? Why?
Mhm.
Like, what made you, want to go there?
I love it.
Everybody
Yeah.
needs money, what's your?
How do you get money for that? That's expensive, right? What are you the most terrified of? I mean, this is like, for me, when I was a senior, I loved this time, but I was kind of freaking out. Are you freaking out? What are you freaking out about? And that, the kid may or may not respond to that, but you want to give them the best invitation to participate, right? I mean, and so that's what you want to do. And I'll tell you, if you have low energy about the question, they're going to have low energy about the question. So what school are you going to go to? Right? Have you nailed down what school you're going to go to? Why did you pick that one? Boy, that's far from home. Are you terrified? Or, boy, that's pretty close to home. Are you terrified? I don't know, right? But there's energy in that. All right. So now, third one. So this one is a role play. You're welcome, Julie. Decide who's the one and who's the two.
What's the one?
I'm deciding.
You can be one, I'll be two.
It doesn't matter at this point. Let's do it. I'm never going to tell you what one and two is.
I'm one.
It'll be more important practice.
Okay. If you were the one, let's have you be the teacher first. You're both going to practice, and you're the student. Okay. What scenario? Okay, I'm going to give you two different scenarios for each person. So if you're the student right now, you're not going to get the same scenario when you're the teacher. But okay. So for this scenario, let's say you have a new student, just moved in. Family just moved in. You literally know nothing about them. So that means this is both terrifying and exciting because the sky's the limit on what you can ask because you know nothing.
And we can be anybody we want to be?
Yeah. In fact, if you're the student right now, go ahead and pretend you know where you're coming from and what kind of a kid you are and what you're into, all that kind of stuff. Get that prepped up. Now, if you're the teacher, obviously you're going to ask, what's your name? And you're going to ask those boring questions. But you need to ask something that you're excited to know and they're excited to tell you. That's your goal. Okay, you got 2 minutes. Ready? Go.
Hey, Hey, nice to meet you. What's your name?
Cherry, did you like it there?
Hey,
Miles.
Nice to meet you.
We're
Where
friends, right?
are you moving from?
Hard to move.
We just came from Korea.
Where's Korea? Nice. What's it like over
From
there?
Portland,
I've
Oregon.
never been there.
Excited to be here.
3-day ride.
That's it? Busy,
All my
dirty?
life.
Now north or south?
So this is a big change for
Yeah.
Did you escape? Okay.
Did you
Just make sure.
escape?
Just want to make sure.
People are different here. That you've met so far.
Well, I got lots of neighbors, so always spend time at neighbors' houses.
So, have you gone to church here in
We don't
Aurora yet,
have
or you just did
neighbors like we did
you
there.
move in a while?
They're all too far away.
I've been
Live in the city.
Months?
Got here.
What do you think about the young women?
Here we learned
so
to
far?
go.
Bigger seminary? Was your seminary just bigger? Or were you
They're
in
not as nice
seminary?
as I would.
Back there or here?
Really?
Here, no, nobody lives close enough.
That was only 1 minute, you got one more to go. Are you running
Well, I
out?
don't have any friends here. I just moved here.
Yeah.
Because I personally, I think you
Okay,
got
so what kind
Lizzie
of
and
you want?
Olivia, and they're great.
Usually all others are.
I do in Oregon.
Usually other way.
Always in
Yeah, I
band.
was gonna say, they're on our side. I'm in my
I'm gonna
imaginary
try.
ward.
Hope you like
They're
it.
not nice.
What did you do back in Korea for fun? What activities were you in school?
No, I
Swim.
Swim?
30
Lining up
seconds.
for
You know,
class.
I've never really done swim for a sport.
Trumpet.
Were you good at it?
No.
No?
Everybody
Why'd you
got
do
it.
it
Since
then?
4th grade.
So what is your favorite?
Oh, okay. I can do cannonballs and I've done a belly flop contest. Have you ever done a belly flop contest?
I've done them, but not on purpose.
No,
Do you
I
perform?
seriously, totally
With the
read.
That's
band.
hilarious.
It was great.
That's horrible.
I guess
That's good.
favorite,
As a student, I'm gonna.
favorite song.
All right. I'm curious about, now 2 minutes is a long time, actually,
It
right?
is a long time.
What are your impressions? What happened as you were trying to do it for 2 minutes?
His questions got better.
They got better.
Yeah.
He was getting momentum.
He was like,
Yeah.
okay, let's.
They were talking belly flops over here. Julie, were you the teacher?
Yes,
So what happened as you were trying to carry it on for 2 minutes?
I ran out of questions. And
Did
my
it start feeling
questions
forced
got
a little
worse.
bit? Yeah. Jonathan, why did your questions start getting better?
I'm currently looking up the definition of self-deprecation, but I think it's, self-deprecation, where I start like
Making fun of
making
yourself.
fun of myself. Like, that's why I was talking about, she was like, oh, I did swimming and all that. I'm like, I've really not been a good swimmer. I did a belly flop contest once, so I always try to find something stupider sometimes.
Because they already feel a little bit self-conscious, so
Yeah.
Right,
on
so
me, ridicule on me.
Right, so if I can ever make myself lower or stupider or in a worse situation so that they can talk and not feel like their situation
Is
is
bad.
worse than mine, it helps them feel more comfortable. Because I'm like, I did a belly flop contest, and she's like looking at me like, you're so stupid, and I'm like, yeah, I am. Now tell me more.
Now let me make a comment about this, because Jonathan and I are maybe cut from that same cloth. Self-deprecation is the way I do it too. I'm always looking for a way to tease the kid, but to also make them feel like I'm worse or whatever. But that's not your style, is it, Julie? No, not at all. So that's it. That's really, that works for him. And so then we think, all right, well then what's going to work for Julie? And maybe 2 minutes is too long. Like, you're not going to sit there. The kid's going to start feeling, okay, I mean, you've asked me enough questions, interrogator, right? And so maybe that's too much. Did you feel like, though, you asked a couple of good, solid questions?
I don't know.
Miles, did she ask you a couple of good, solid questions?
Sure.
What was the best question she asked?
The best question. Well, the question that kind of stumped me was when she asked me what my favorite song was.
Yeah.
He plays the trumpet.
He said he plays
But
the
I don't have a
trumpet.
favorite song.
Yeah.
But something did come to mind to tell her a story about, so,
You did tell a story?
no, I was going to.
Oh, and then 2 minutes ran out.
He was
You were
about
just
to.
getting steam.
I almost succeeded.
Yeah, I like it. And even, it is sometimes hard. I'm a painter, and sometimes people are like, well, what's your favorite color? I'm like, I don't know, all of them, right? But sometimes if you can say, well, you're a trumpeter, I hear that it's really hard to hit the high notes. Like, are you good at the high notes? You know, I don't know, you know, whatever. But more specific, less like, well, what's, you know, anyway. But
Really what I want to know is about that spit thing. You know,
yeah, you talk spit, you got it. That's my style, though. I'm surprised you thought spit, Julie. I'm really shocked. It's my
He's got
style.
enough on you doing
I
it.
know, you be around me long enough. We're going to talk bodily functions. Me and my 5 brothers. You had a thought a second ago?
It's gone.
It's gone. You had a thought just now?
So I once worked with someone who refused to talk about personal life. Like, it was just
The
all
student
business.
or
This was in
college?
research,
Okay.
college. And he was a postdoc that I was doing research with, and I was trying so hard to get him to like open up. And finally, the method that I found worked was to exemplify the type of information I wanted out of him and then ask him about it.
What do you mean?
So I wanted to learn about his family, and he'd be like, they're from India. And okay, so finally I told him a story about my dad, how he's worked at the U of I, and he's a rocket scientist, and you know, as I was a kid, he'd let me burn rocket fuel, and I was like, I can't remember exactly. But, and then be like, you know, what's your dad do for work? And I got a little bit more than...
You modeled for him the
Right.
kind of answer you hoped to get.
Right, I modeled the answer I wanted him to give. Yeah, I got a little bit more than
India.
he works...
Blank, fill in the blank, yeah.
Right. He was like, he works at a grocery store that we've owned from our family. And it still wasn't as long of an answer.
That's interesting.
But my example answer helped him know what I was expecting. Not, what's your dad do? He owns a grocery store. But it was a little bit more. And it was that repetitive process.
You warm him up.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like the self-deprecation where I like try to make myself worse, or I try to give like what I want back.
Yeah.
Like, this is the information I'm giving you. I want the similar information back.
So that's a great way of articulating it, because I've done that when kids are new because they've moved here, and I'll usually say, oh man, you moved, what are you, you know, what year are you? And they're like, I'm a junior. I'm like, I moved when I was a junior too. I moved states, I moved high schools. It was really hard. Is it hard? You know, and suddenly, you know, you're sharing your story a little bit, and they're sharing their story. Now, you may never have moved or whatever, but that's interesting. Model the kind of answer you want to get. That's kind of a cool idea. How was it going over here? Who was the teacher? Who's the student?
Teacher.
Teacher. Melinda, what was your experience for 2 minutes of interrogation? Did it get better or worse? Was it easier or harder as
It
it
got
went?
harder.
As you went? And you and Julie seem, I think you'd be kind of cut maybe a little from the same cloth, that you've asked a couple questions, but you don't want to pry. Maybe that's how you feel a little bit. Whereas me and Jonathan, we want to pry the heck
Well,
out of it, you know, right?
I think I can understand how you were getting to that point, because at first I started just asking questions, like question after question after question, and I started to feel like this is heading towards awkwardness if I just keep asking questions, and that's why I wanted to start talking about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't want to use it the whole time, but that's why I started talking about, you know, the little bit of swimming I've done, which is belly flop contests.
Right.
Um,
But if you notice that the cadence is my question, quick answer, my question, quick answer, my question, quick answer, that is going to start feeling like, isn't it true that, you know, and they're like on the stand. And so you want to get somehow them to fill up more with some story or whatever.
So, but you can do that by, if any of their questions relates to your own life, talk a short little bit about
Relate a little bit.
yourself for a moment, kind of exemplifying the answers that you want again, or to get them to look at you like you're crazy, which is good. But take a moment to talk about yourself instead of a question after question after question after question.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion.
One thing I noticed as the student, and as I was trying to think, how would a student, a new
Feel about
student
this.
answer these? Most of the questions were one-word answers, yes or no, or just a quick
Yeah.
answer, where I am from, whatever. Which, it's hard to do follow-up questions off of those. So I think that's the hardest part, is coming up with the questions to ask that require them to give you more of an answer that you can then
Yeah.
expound on and say, oh, tell me about that, or whatever.
So Melinda, give me one of the questions that you asked that you hope to have gotten more from, but you just got a single word answer. Well, let's work on it together. Or is there one you've got in mind, Missy, that she asked you?
She asked where I was from,
Uh-huh.
and was it a big seminary there, and are you are you happy about moving, or do you miss it, or?
So let's do the, are you happy about moving? Because the answer is yes or no.
Right.
Right? What would be a more open-ended way to ask that same question? To
What was it
maybe
like there?
from where you came from?
Yeah, what was it like in Portland?
Yeah. And so, yeah, tell me about where you're from. I've never been from where you're from. Or I've been there, man, I thought that was a cool place. Did you think it was a cool place? Tell me
Well,
about
she
it.
asked, did you like it there?
Mhm.
You know,
Did it give you a chance? Did you feel motivated to give her a lot?
I just said, yeah, it was good.
She wasn't a very easy student, was
Well, I
she?
picked a fake place that I've never been to, so I'm like,
Oh,
sure.
sure.
it's
Okay, what's she talking about?
nice. So I'm trying to make up an answer anyway, which makes it harder, but.
Right, so, but if the goal is, I want to know if you're happy about moving or not, and then our same rules apply, but you can't ask, are you happy about moving or not? You know, there could be some other questions. So one could be, tell me about where you're from.
Or how do you feel about it?
Yeah. What has been one thing you've seen since you've moved here that you're kind of excited about? And maybe they're like, nothing. All I see are cornfields, you know, or whatever. And you'd be like, man, that's all I see too. You know, I hear you. However, you know, but that's the goal, right? You want to know, how are they feeling? Is this student coming to me happy, or is this student coming to me totally mad at the world? But you can't just ask them. Well, maybe you could. Are you mad at the world over this move? Maybe, I don't know. But that's hard, right? We're going to switch roles. Let's switch roles, and we're going to switch scenarios. So if you were the student, you're now the teacher. If you're the teacher, you're now the student. Here's the new scenario. You've made a goal to personally welcome every student to class with more than just their name and welcome to class. Like you've made a goal to actually ask them something as they're coming to the class. So the first person, you're ready to do this, and the first person that walks into class is that one student that you don't have the best relationship with. Okay, so you can go ahead and imagine who that student even is, okay? What's one thing, well, what kind of a conversation are you going to try to have with them to personally welcome them to class? But this is, well, would it help if I gave you some details about the student?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say this is a squirrely sophomore who, anytime you have interactions with them, maybe it's a little negative because you usually tell them to be quiet or something like that. But you want to get to know this kid a little bit better as they come into class. All right? That's your scenario. You got 2 minutes. Now, learn what we've learned. If it's rapid fire yes/no questions, it's going to be like Russian interrogation. You want to get them to answer a little bit more expansively, try to get them to tell stories, and so try to be creative with your questions. But you're doing it on the fly. They walked in, you're like, oh, that's the first one I got to practice on? Okay, ready, set, go.
Your name is Julie, right?
Secretary.
Okay. Hey, Julie, we had all that rain yesterday. How many people did you see that fall in the water or slipped into yesterday?
Oh, I've been busy doing I had a question different.
Did you see anybody?
Uh,
No funny
What
events
did you
like
do
that?
yesterday?
Well, no.
Played video
No.
games after school.
Well, I was going out to the car and
Anything cool?
I went to check the oil and I tried to step over the puddle and I stepped right into it. I got my coat caught on the bumper and, I ended up falling and got all wet and didn't look like what I had.
Sophomore semester lead, I guess, whatever your name is.
How do I ask a question about that?
What did you do yesterday?
That's
Yeah, but,
Sorry.
yeah, it's okay, but at least you can laugh about it. I don't know if you've ever had anything like that happen to you, but
I'm sorry. Do they expect you just to do that stuff?
what do I ask for that?
They're good parents.
How to?
You should respect your parents. They're
I don't know.
more strict
Yeah,
than
right.
they're soft.
So what's your favorite?
All right,
So I could get away with stuff, but I also was stuck between two kids who were
Gee,
a lot worse. How are your siblings?
We've done a lot.
that was a dead end. Didn't go anywhere.
I didn't have
We had several, we have a lot.
I thought you're the student, Jonathan.
It's
So
better
you,
practice for me.
I was like,
you're the student, you're asking her all these
questions. Okay, good.
Did they give you grief?
Drama,
They cause it.
what do? Do you act, do you play, what do
I
you
usually
do?
have a small crowd, so it's nice.
Has that happened recently? Can you expound? I can think of
I don't know, what's an understudy?
my childhood too. Actually, I have a
If
little
the
bit. I
person
can't.
is
But
sick,
what happened to you?
or they fall off the stage,
I've been
and break their
sports,
leg.
basketball.
So you're like
30
a
seconds.
backup?
Sister did it.
Yes.
clean.
Oh, okay. I didn't know they had such a thing for plays.
Forward.
Is that common in drama to have such a thing?
What's in your favorite?
Yeah, but
Backup
people
parts?
don't make the.
Why weren't you a
don't
better
make the-
example? I mean, come on.
So what do
Are
you,
good enough to get over.
And you couldn't have been too long.
what do you need to do to be good enough to get the lead role rather than having to be the understudy?
Just,
Oh,
okay,
you
maybe.
have to be
It's like you're talking to the
Oh,
system,
yeah,
you
it's-
have a recorder.
Yeah, I realized that.
I think you have to be the teacher.
Yeah, it's who you know, not what you know.
And time.
Best actor.
You would have.
You're laughing by the end.
Good. Elijah would have the answer.
Good,
I
good.
gave you honest answers.
This is,
I found it easier for you if you were a younger sister lead.
we're done, stop talking. Oh, you're debriefing now, okay. She was a little bit of a steel trap for you, wasn't she?
Sister Stoll mentioned that it was hard for her to make up answers for a fake person, and
So you
that
gave her a
started off
character?
when she was like, "I played video games," and she's like, "Wait, I've never played video games. Can't ask me about that." And so I'm like, "Pretend to be a sophomore sister lead," and then all of a sudden she
You
started to
played
give
video games.
I've
Or not, no.
Never, ever. I
she
don't-
started to give better answers because she was pretending to be herself.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing with role plays is you're not a teenager. Like I realized I should have picked a squirrely sophomore for all the situations the people playing it. You're not squirrely. So this is tough, and thank you for being willing to practice. Here's the real question though. So we've been role playing and that's fine, but how are you really going to actually practice this going forward? Because obviously, to do these things correctly and to get better at it, it's got to be something we consistently do. So let me give you 2 minutes in your journal, and I just want you to think, okay, so going forward in the next bunch of lessons you have to teach, how could you practice, who could you practice on to get a little bit better? Because really what we're talking about, at least in this drill, is small talk, right? This is just getting better at small talk actually engendering some kind of a love, respect, a relationship. So think about what that looks like for you to practice this.
You mean like real life practice?
I mean real life practice. Well, it could be like on your spouse, but it could be like with a kid who knows that you're practicing on them. I don't know, right? What does that look like for you? While you're thinking, I'm going to adjust what you're thinking about too, because I realize I focused in on just one aspect of this, but in any of these things we've talked about, what's one thing you're going to maybe do about it this week that maybe you haven't tried before to put into practice one of the things that it says you might want to do. Whether that be, get on social media, maybe you want to text your kids a little bit more often, personally invite them to class, whatever. Pick something you're going to work on.